Hello, everyone. Welcome back to ARKAT's Urban Planning Podcast. I'm joined here by my fantastic co-host, Fatma Al-Khayyat. And today we're going to explore a topic that's very close to our hearts, the evolution of urban planning in the UAE, how it began, where we are today, and where we're headed to.
And of course, we're truly honored to be joined by someone whose work has directly shaped the evolution in urban planning here in the UAE, as Dr. Ahmed mentioned. Dr. Salem Al Shafiei, thank you so much for joining us. He's an urban planner, policy strategist, and educator who has played a major role in defining the planning landscape in the UAE. From leading strategic government initiatives to mentoring future planners, Dr. Salem brings a rare blend of visionary thinking and real-world impact and has been a vocal advocate for elevating the planning profession across the region.
We're excited to learn about his journey, reflections, and insights on what it takes to build cities that are not just ambitious, but also viable, livable, resilient, and deeply rooted in context. So without further ado, thank you, Dr. Salem, for being here with us.
You're welcome. I'm very humbled by this beautiful
Thank you.
generous introduction.
So we're going to dive right in. Urban planning, as you know, isn't a field many stumble into by chance. It's often sparked by a vision or a need to shape communities for the better. You've played a significant role in shaping the UAE's urban landscape. Can you take us back to the beginning? What initially inspired you to pursue planning? And how has your journey influenced your philosophy on how cities should be made?
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for this very vital question. Well, I think your question takes me back to the days when I started studying at the university back in the US. In my first year of university, I was not surely decided on what to study. But then with time, I managed to find the field of urban planning through the search that I did. And I remember these are days before the internet. And so we had to glimpse through guides and manuals and university catalogs and so on and so forth. So looking at that, I found the field, and I was really, I was attracted to it because of the significant role plays in impacting people's life.
Yeah.
And shaping communities, and also helping communities realize their vision, both short term and long term. So that, based on that, I decided to choose. But also, go a little bit before that. I always had passion with geography, with the spatial manifestation of human activities and their impact on the lives. Even going back to the days when I was a teenager, I remember a few cases where I used to question land use and site selection and urban planning.
Oh, wow. So that spark comes from an early age.
I remember those, and even my father sometimes remind me of those incidents.
Yeah. And what did you start in before? Because I think it's very common. Like, I think me as well, my trajectory is that I went into architecture and then from there found urban planning.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point as well. I commonly would notice both in the US and in the UK and also other parts with the Western world, like in Australia and Canada, urban planning usually is a higher education, is a master's degree.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
And usually people come from either architecture or civil engineering or geography or
economy
or social studies or whatever field they study. So the professional degree, the terminal professional degree that professional planners acquire usually is a master's degree. But luckily for me, I started with the Bachelor of Urban Planning. There were only 14 PAB, Planning Accreditation Board programs that were accredited in the US. And luckily, I went and got my degree from one of those accredited programs. A 4-year degree, Bachelor of Science in Urban Planning. That was the start of my professional journey with that degree.
Do you mind me asking what university?
The University of Alabama.
Wow.
Interesting. So your journey is very similar to mine, because I'm also an urban planner by both education and profession, and I also did it for both my bachelor's and master's. So it's interesting to hear that it was an emerging field since then.
Yeah, and also there was very, very little known about the field, particularly in our part of the world.
Absolutely.
I think it's up until now. That's the whole reason why we have this podcast and why we're our Instagram platform as well. The whole aim and objective is to really educate people around urban planning, because I still get asked to this day, what do you do as an urban planner? And I have to break it down for them. I'm like an architect, but on a wider scale.
Or people have heard of the term urban planning, but they don't really know what it encompasses in terms of scope.
And there's a lot of confusion with other fields and
true.
So on. And also we all know that also there are people from other fields who practice within planning offices. So like architecture, engineering, architecture,
Yep.
and other allied fields.
Right, right.
So planning is a very all-encompassing and a very wide field, multidisciplinary.
Extremely multidisciplinary.
So because of that, I think also it's a bit unknown, and
Yeah.
that puts more burden on us
Right, right.
to make it better known and the
Exactly.
value of it in societies.
Yeah.
So moving on to our next question. So in a place like UAE, right, where the pace of change is quite exponential, of course, also the term good planning has shifted, right? So from master plans that prioritized infrastructure to people-first approaches, resilience and adaptability. How has your definition of good planning evolved over the course of your career?
Yeah, a very crucial question, I believe, and I think all of us must ask ourselves this question every now and then, because such a question brings forward the best ideas in terms of what we need to do.
Yeah.
I think for me the simplest answer would be a good planning paradigm is a planning paradigm that tries to balance functionality, sustainability, and quality of life in a very well managed governance process. And once you do that, once you adopt such principles in your planning work, in your planning paradigm, you begin to look for answers that can give you the best results both for current and future generations.
Yeah.
So we work in a field. Urban planning has got no one agreed on definition amongst our professionals.
True.
But there is a lot of agreement on what is the good planning and what makes good cities. Points you mentioned regarding the progress of an evolution of planning is quite fascinating, because no one society landed on the ideal paradigm that one could claim. All societies have gone through process of learning.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
And I take you back to the days of the Industrial Revolution, when cities were plagued by disease, by premature death, and all that, and overcrowding and miserable conditions the cities were living in. And then the realization was that the problem is because of overcrowding, mixing land use, and lack of open spaces, and small rooms, a lack of ventilation, and lack of sunlight, and so on and so forth. And then we decided to bring in planning, and we formalized planning, and we went into land use planning and zoning, and then we ultimately solved one health problem that then we created other problems.
Exactly.
Health problem. We went into a huge separation of land use and
Urban
big
sprawl,
and then a big distance between work and home, and then
car-centric planning.
So all of that shows that human societies have been learning, and we continue to learn, because technology and the changes that we are and the trends that are we're embarking on in the world are very crucial in shaping and reshaping the paradigms that we all work. But we've learned a lot.
Yeah.
I think humanity and people in the profession have learned a lot from the past 100 years or so. So I think for me if you can balance functionality, sustainability, and quality of life together, and you mesh them together in a well-governed, well-managed governance process, you can certainly have the best outcomes possible.
And aspire to the ideal of good planning. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And going back to that point, Dr. Salem, what you've mentioned is absolutely correct. And I think few countries in the world have changed and developed as dramatically as the UAE and the wider GCC have in the last 50 years. From basic infrastructure to high tech, and now transitioning more and more towards human-centric urbanism. In your opinion, and of course, like you mentioned, our cities are results of many differing and turning points of views. My question to you is, in your opinion, what have been the defining milestones that have had the most impact in shaping our planning journeys today?
Yeah, I think a quick look at the history of cities in the UAE, or history of human settlements in the UAE, would reveal the fact that we've gone through three distinct phases, I think. We started up until the 1960s. We started with very organic, vernacular, natural sort of urban development, and with very little formal planning taking place, because before that there was not much in terms of formal urban planning. But then, from then and onward, starting from the, perhaps the early 60s and onward up until the early 1990s, we went into a phase of, of planned growth, in which, the cities were extended very close to the center, where the historic cities were found, and those growth patterns were meeting the community's needs in terms of housing, industrial, and other uses. So that second wave was also natural, and that of course came with the advent of modern urban planning, as we know it. And we all know that modern urban planning in the UAE started by the effort from late Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed Al Maktoum, the former ruler of Dubai.
Yes.
In 1959, he brought the renowned British architect, town planner John Harris to Dubai,
exactly.
And he started the effort of organizing the growth of the city. So that first wave was a result of the work that came out of the first 1960 plan, and then also the review of the plan in 1970, that also guided the work up until that period. So that's the second phase. So it was planned. The city was still, within the confines that were considered to be a small city by international standards. The third wave that we witness in the city of Dubai, and as well as in other parts of the Gulf region, is what was driven by what we refer to now as the mega projects, or the major urban development projects. And that period was a very expansive in terms of the geographic and the spatial extension of the city.
Right.
But also with that came the hypermobility and the higher reliance on automobile. And that was, of course, the reason, because there was growing need for travel and mobility between different parts of the city, but also between neighboring cities.
Yes.
So at that point, that we're now at perhaps at the end of that third phase.
Absolutely.
One could not claim that it's the end of it, but we're at the limit of that part. And with the adoption of the Dubai 2040 plan, of course. Now there is, I think there is a tendency, or there is a desire to reverse some of those things that happened in the third phase.
In the third phase, right?
Because if you look at the first and second phase, still the city was more walkable. The land use mix was still much more down to human scale.
Yes.
And it's funny that again we see that we're going back to these more primitive strategies, right?
Yeah, I think it was more responsive to human, because the human scale was very integral.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
It was by the instinct of the work. But then when artificial means like air conditioning, automobile, elevators, all these things came, we managed to manipulate.
Exactly.
Sometimes to a very radical extent, where we.
I like that you use the word manipulate.
So
where the human scale is lost. You're right.
It's lost because of that, and I tend to view human scale both horizontally and vertically, because as human beings, your interaction with the built environment happens at both, spatially or horizontally.
Yes.
Is that how much space can you cover, how far can you walk, and how easy is your built environment. And how much it enables you to maneuver. The horizontal space, and then of course vertically is that feel that you get from being in a city. That's why I have a passion for the medium density city. Not very high and not very not very tall, but not very
low either.
Low density, where you lose the efficiency and the ability to run transit and things of that sort, and also to ensure social integration by
Absolutely. And could you give examples of, because I absolutely agree. I think medium density and like having the diversity of uses at that scale is better. Like, could you give examples of cities that you think have done it right or have found the sweet spot?
Yeah, I think most European cities. If you go to Prague, if you go to Vienna, if you go to Zurich, most European cities have always even Italian cities,
Yes.
Spain.
Yeah.
You have a lot of these mediums in cities where there is such a nice harmony between people and the built environment, and both horizontally and vertically.
Exactly.
So you could maneuver that, but also you don't feel overwhelmed
Uh-huh.
by the humongous
Scale.
around you. So it's a very interesting. Now one would question, was this out of deliberate thinking, or was this a norm at that time in European cities? Because many of the cities have got also a long history.
Right, of course.
So this this is. But what also you see in the Gulf cities and in the UAE and other parts, also you've got a lot of a lot of spaces like that. If you go to the to the Dubai area,
Right,
and,
the Deira.
Deira side and all
Yes.
these areas, they
Yeah.
were nice,
Yeah.
medium density, mixed use, where work and residents were close to each other.
Yeah.
And it is these areas now where we managed to bring some of the transit, because they do have the land use impetus for
course.
for the success.
Yeah.
How do you think? Sorry,
No,
but
please go ahead.
how do you think we can implement these strategies in today in cities like in the Gulf? Is it through policy, do you think, or through design, or governance, as you mentioned earlier?
I think through all of these these measures, all of these mechanisms, what you need to do is you need to first recognize that you've got both existing areas, and you've got brownfield areas where you've got older buildings, empty lands around. Metro stations in Gulf cities like Dubai and Riyadh and Doha create tremendous opportunity for introducing and bringing such ideas into. To my knowledge, I think around 55% of the land around Dubai metro stations are up there for intensification, for rezoning and changing of land use. So I think you can take also existing areas outside in the suburb, in the suburban areas, and you can also introduce that. I mean, you have opportunities across, but you need to have a plan, because you need to be able to integrate that with transit, and you need to be able to integrate that with other systems that would help in achieving a complete result. Right now, what you have is you have lots of low density suburban sprawl around cities with pockets of very high density development, but no transit provision, excessive parking supply, and so on. So the high density in the suburbs, but a lot of low density around the suburb. If you come to the urban centers here, you come to downtown area, you come to the marina, and you come to the Silicon Oasis. You see high density centers, but all are functioning as separate.
Isolation,
in isolation, separate. So
It's
I think
a debate that we always have.
the 2040 plan will become very instrumental, we're hoping, because the plan does create a vision for connecting and for redefining those centers and making them into specialized centers that are connected with their surroundings. So that initiative in the 2040 plan, I think, does create a lot of opportunity for improvement and bringing back some of these practices that we talk about. Hopefully,
and that long-term effect as well. But you mentioned the 2040 plan. Are there any other strategies that have such a long-term effect, you think?
You mean across the UAE?
Yeah, that have been implemented.
Yeah, I think in Abu Dhabi they have got similar also views on that. And there's
the
always
plan
discussion.
Capital 2030 was also, I think, a very innovative plan for the time.
Yeah, so no, there is recognition for the need of making sure that whatever development we have is stitched together. It's, it's properly functioning. And they're connected, to different parts of the city, in a sustainable way. And so, I think the period of the growth and mega projects resulted in tremendous growth with lots of economic achievements and goals out of those projects. And I think what's now remaining is that through a plan like 2040 plan, we refine matters and make things work better in a holistic manner. And I think, because I had the chance to look at the 2040 plan closely, I think the plan does bring a lot of value in terms of leveraging on what's there and making it function, as a comprehensive piece.
I absolutely agree. And maybe before we move on to the next segment, just one last question about the past. I think, of course, with every success story, we learn things in hindsight, whether it's from our early car-centric designs, missed opportunities in, for example, heritage preservation, or monofunctional zoning, all things we've mentioned. And we're lucky to have you because you've also been instrumental in shaping urban planning in the region since the 90s. So our question to you is, are there any not missed opportunities, but any planning decisions from the past that have kind of been lost that you feel like today we should bring back and would have value bringing these back?
Yeah, I think one of the things that come to my mind is, the Emirati housing.
Okay, yeah.
I think, I had the privilege of living in, in the earlier days where, I used to live in more dense.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, we were living in a plot of 50 by 50 foot where we had about 48 people around, 15,000 square foot.
Wow.
That is 6 plots.
Wow. Yeah.
And those 6 plots now, have become one plot.
One plot, right.
Where you've got only 7 people on the 15,000.
And one family rather than 6.
One
Exactly.
family, and the family size has declined.
Right.
So what I miss now at this age is the social, life and
Community,
public life outside
Right.
the neighborhoods. So I think this is something we, I cherish from my childhood days and my youth times, where the neighborhood unit was more than just homes and bricks and mortars. It was more of a social
fabric.
fabric, and there was collective affairs of people together enjoying, and then we were so close to each other, and I think we've lost that
Definitely.
due to primarily due to, of course, low density.
Of course.
Of course, the aim is very benevolent, where the government wants to improve the quality of life and give people much better opportunities for housing and all that. But one of the unintended consequences of such policy is that we brought down the density severely. And when you bring the density down severely, you ultimately suck out life.
Absolutely.
From these areas.
Right.
And also with the point you mentioned, Dr. Ahmed, the single use zoning also, so there's hardly any life outside in the streets.
Right.
And I say this example is that we live in the safest city in the world. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Ajman, and Sharjah. We live in the safest cities in the world, no question, no doubt. But when you go out to the suburbs, and you live in a suburban unit, you don't feel that much safe, having your child going out, because there's no one outside.
No eyes on the street.
There is no eyes on the street. There is no life outside.
Yeah.
So to me, this is a really, it's a
contradictory,
it's a paradox.
almost.
And an interesting point is that so perhaps one thing I think if we can revive and bring back, it's bringing back to life, to social life, into these areas, and I think we need to start with tackling density, and I think the government has recently done that by reducing the plot size, and I think it needs to further look into that.
Right.
Be more engaged in place making in these areas rather than just plot or lot production. We need to the planners and urban designers of the municipality need to pay attention to that, and this takes me to another point where I think planners need to go out and need to really have first-hand interaction with the space. They're so overwhelmed with their work in the office. They do a lot of production of plans and lots and all that from behind the desk. But they have very little understanding.
True.
About how people use the space and how they interact, and what works best, what doesn't work. I think we need to do that, and we need to encourage that even with university programs. We need to instill that in the culture.
Yeah.
And Dubai, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed has instilled a very important value in work, is that working behind the desk in a closed room, a closed door, will not take you very far.
No, you have to be
you
on
need
ground.
To be out. You need to be in the field. You
Yes.
need to understand what goes outside. What are people's aspirations? What's working for them? What do they need more? What do they need being done differently? All of that can only be understood when you go out and interact.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is the point which I've noticed through my career, is that because of overwhelming work and because of the speed and all that, and the assumption that we know everything, we end up repeating the same sort of solution that quite often don't give you the best results.
Absolutely.
So I do from this platform, I do call on my fellow planners, urban designers, to spend some time going out. And I have a personal story with, which has to do this,
Please.
do with
go
this. But
ahead.
it's not a planning story. It's more of an architectural, but it has, of course, a planning implication. There's a plot of land right in front of where I live, an empty plot of land in Al Mizhar.
Yeah.
And so that plot remained vacant for about 23 years.
Okay.
And then finally the plot owner decided to build it. And there's 4 mature half trees right on the side of the plot line, but on the public street.
Right.
And so the architect who designed that villa never bothered to come to the field, never bothered to open
Consider.
Google Map,
Oh,
because these trees are very old.
yeah.
And you see them, in Google, even in Google Map.
Yeah.
So what he did, he designed the villa and he brought the villa gate, the car gates, the automobile gate
Yeah.
for the villa. He put it right in the middle of those trees.
Oh no.
And then one day I was sitting, at home, and I saw the trucks
Coming and excavating.
trying to explain. I said, "What are you guys doing?" They said, "We're, the owner wants his door to be here." I said, "Well, you've got all that space there, and this is a ghaf. Ghaf is a legally
Native
protected
It
tree.
is,
in the
absolutely.
UAE. So I managed ultimately to convince them. Now we've saved those 4 ghafs.
Really?
I'm very happy.
That's amazing.
I listened to the Romans of the Balabil
Yeah.
every morning. It's a beautiful habitat for wildlife.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Green, we all enjoy having those trees where they are. I mean, they were born there even before we came to the area.
Of course.
So I thought that was my biggest achievement 2023.
Well, that's really inspirational, actually, and it reminded me of a quote that I always read from Sheikh Zayed, the previous ruler of the UAE, which is you don't move a tree to build a road. You move the road around the tree,
Indeed, yes.
which I think is so beautiful, and it brings back this intrinsic relationship we have with nature and the importance of that, especially us living in a desert.
Exactly.
We really, really have to take care
And
of our
it
resources.
also shows a great commitment.
Yes.
Exactly.
And it's an instruction by the leader himself.
Yeah.
Is that we need to pay attention to these things. So I hope planners do take these things,
We really
and
hope so
architects
too.
as well, and
Yes.
and
Yeah.
those people who are
definitely.
involved in the built environment fields.
Yeah.
Of
yeah,
course, yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, our cities today are frequently celebrated for innovation and ambition, right? But behind the scenes, there's growing tension between vision and execution. I think we've been talking a lot about that, especially around livability and resilience. In your opinion, what are some areas where we need to dig deeper beyond the headlines to truly deliver people-centered, sustainable cities?
Yeah, I'd like to focus on some positive achievement. We discussed the 2040 plan
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the value it will bring. I think the very next most important achievement of planning that I think will bring results in the future is the adoption of, in the example of Dubai,
Yeah.
city's adoption of the law number 16 for year 2023 concerning urban planning. For the first time,
Yes.
we have a law that will give more legitimacy and more official standing for planning, and it's for planning tools and measures that that will be ultimately adopted. I'm hoping that utilizing on this, and this is a great recognition by the government, for the importance of planning.
Right.
So planners now need to leverage on that and need to build on that and begin to introduce those much needed and long overdue ideas that that will help us bridge the gap between the vision and implementation. In the past, the legal tool was missing. We did not have a planning tool that enables. Now we have the law, and I think we have the regulations now in the making. So we're hoping that by the introduction, and this is an unprecedented case in the UAE.
In the UAE, true.
It's the first planning law
Yeah.
that we were waiting for many years. So it's here now, and I think
Yes.
planning institutions and planners and urban designers and those who have got interest and passion in planning, use the great value of this law and be
Leverage
able to
it, yeah.
and be able to implement
Yeah.
the vision and the plans and the policies that that are there to reverse some of the things that we want to reverse.
Agreed. And I think building on Fatma's question, I think today many developments are promote themselves in the UAE and wider GCC as like 15-minute cities, walkable cities, integrated communities. And yes, these are powerful ideas, but sometimes they stay on the page. In your experience, what must be done to make sure these buzzwords translate into reality and not just kind of like check boxes that planners have to tick?
Yeah, I think this is a very important thing, because between the marketing, jargons and the marketing, campaigns that run by different developers in the region, and between reality on the ground, there's always this, gap. I think once the master plans that are developed by these different developers are subjected to review and enhancement and improvement, and then ultimately adoption and approval of government authorities, it must be clear at that stage if that the plan that claims to be a 15-minute community or or even a TOD or whatever, it need to be given that sort of voice from as a result of the review itself.
Got you.
Because
Absolutely.
if you don't do that, ultimately people can claim anything. They claim they're sustainable. They claim yet they create more impact on the environment than others by just the virtue of fact of being middle of nowhere.
Of course.
So it's important that the government entities that are in charge of licensing and permitting planning schemes, urban design schemes, that they do also look after this. I think it's an important point. Is it should not just be a selling point, a selling voice, but it should be really a lifestyle choice that people are looking for.
Definitely.
If I'm looking for a 15-minute community, I want to live in a truly
15-minute community.
That only needs to be vetted by the authorities.
Of course, and they
their
need to
expertise.
scrutinize these claims.
Exactly, they need to be vetted, and they need to be also given that status. Otherwise, it will remain and we've learned a lot, of course, in the region, as you mentioned, Dr. Ahmed, is that between the claim and between what reality brings you, there's a big gap.
For sure.
And you talked about national housing, and I think it's a really important topic of conversation to delve into. Specifically under housing affordability, right? So it's becoming a national conversation, and while the government has made efforts on both ends of the spectrum, from both luxury and public housing, there's still, I think, a visible gap in the missing middle. So what are some practical planning tools or policies we can introduce today to ensure long-term housing equity for specifically for Emiratis and residents?
I'm a believer in housing mobility, and by that I mean that households do go through phases.
I love that. Can you explain that further?
We don't need to be stuck with one housing typology, throughout your life. We as household, we grow, we change, we start small, we get bigger, and then we ultimately get smaller. So I think to bring efficiency and to eliminate the mismatch between what people really need and want, and then what they get, we need to have a policy where housing mobility, and by that I mean people are able, just like you change your car these days,
Exactly.
you should be able to change your housing base. You need locations important, your neighbors are important,
of course.
The size of the house is important,
size of the family.
I've spoken to people who are retired now. They're all their children got married. They live in a 6-bedroom villa, two floors. They say, I've not been in the upper floor in 6 months.
Oh wow!
Because I don't have an elevator or whatever.
It's
full of dust. You have to cool it. You have to. So by that I mean, I think we need to break out of this tradition, what's known locally as, the lifetime house. Or
Yes.
The We need to break out of that. We need to adapt to housing mobility, a situation where housing mobility is the choice. So we need to find a way by, encouraging. So if you have a big house, you can perhaps let that out to, a big family that is looking for a house in that location.
Yes.
And then perhaps you go and move to another one. Similarly, when you're a newly wedded couple, you don't have any children for 3 or 4 years.
Why are you building a 6-bedroom house?
Exactly.
Why you need that? So I think we need to come to a situation where housing mobility it's a norm, and it's part of and that's not easy. We need to change the way we draft the policy, with the way we implement housing benefits to people and so on and so forth. So. But we need to give that consideration. That's the only thing, I think ultimately will work, because it works, with market, it works with, human needs and changing and evolving, people's needs.
That's fascinating, and I love the term housing mobility, and I completely agree. And this reminded me of a statistic I read that in the US, for example, the average time that someone spends in one residence is 7 years. So on average, every 7 years, someone is moving into a new house. So that's instantly reminded me that, of course, like, why would you live in a 6-bedroom house if there are 2 people and have to maintain that?
Yeah.
So that's a really, really
And with
fascinating
time,
point.
your taste change,
Yes.
your workplace, changes,
Yeah.
your, schools.
Your needs also change.
I'll give you another example of schools, for instance. We, in the Gulf region and in the UAE and Dubai and Abu Dhabi, most of us use private education now, private schools.
Yeah.
There's very little connection between where you live and, the school of your choice.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because we shop for education just like we shop for other,
Yeah.
consumable items and services.
Yes.
So I live in Al-Mazhar where, we used to send our kids to a school in Nadi Shiba. That's 19 kilometers from our door to the school.
Wow.
One way, 19 kilometers. And these are very young children, year 1 and year 3. We did that for many years. And then I know a friend of mine who lives in Nadi Shiba, but he sends his kids to Al-Mazhar. Now, of course, that randomness and movement adds to your traffic
Of course.
problems. And that's why the moment schools close, on holidays and all that, we feel a big relief on the roads.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the relationship between your place of residence and school and work and all that requires that you build in mobility, housing mobility.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm not saying you switch your home every time you switch work, but you must have that flexibility
Definitely.
built in. So the private market does have that in mind.
Yeah.
You can sell the house, you can move, you can switch, you can all that. But for the other type of
We
housing,
need it in the
still-
public
Yeah.
framework as well.
Yeah, you need to bring
Yeah.
bring that kind of thing. And I think
Do you think there's an appetite for that?
it should be because it's very responsive to changing needs. It's very economical. It's very efficient,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and also it reduces strain on your housing stock.
Yes.
You sit on hundreds of underutilized housing
Yeah.
stock.
Exactly.
While you can give that. We talk about shared economy now, and
Of
Yes.
course.
this is the best way to share resources
Right.
Yes.
among the population.
Yeah.
So I think housing mobility for me is key.
And I think
changing.
this is why it's not uncommon for many places around the world that have schooling districts.
Yeah.
So if you
Yes.
live in a certain district, you have to go to school there, and you can't go to school outside of the district.
They ask you about your address,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
it.
That's it.
You belong there, you belong here.
Yeah, for sure.
That's we don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because with predominantly private education that's becoming market driven, and
Yeah.
so we lost that that land use, transportation,
Mm-hmm.
interaction. So long school journeys, random traffic movements from place to place. All of that
It's
is
a
caused by land
nightmare,
use and
yeah.
Yes.
housing policy and so on. So imagine how much influence this urban planning has in the lives of people
Absolutely.
without realizing that
Yeah.
this is all caused by urban planning.
Right.
And that's why the field is very fascinating, but yet
It
very
is.
complex.
Because
Yeah.
hopefully it can also be solved by good urban planning.
Yeah.
Hopefully, yes,
definitely.
indeed.
Okay, we're going to shift gears now, Dr. Salem, because you've been, of course, instrumental in urban planning education and academia in the region. And as we know, urban planning education has grown significantly in the UAE, with more institutions offering specialized degrees. But many graduates tell us that they feel unprepared when they go into the real world. They're not prepared for the fast pace that we were talking about, the complexity that we were just discussing, and also the politics of planning. So from your perspective, what are the current gaps in our academic model, and how can we start to bridge them?
Yeah, I think this is also another very important question, and perhaps you need a long time discussion to come to some acceptable answers. But I think first of all, we're so happy and lucky that we've got about 2 or 3 urban planning programs that are running in the country. The days before year 2000, 2002, we had no planning programs in the country, unfortunately. But since the launch of the Master Urban Planning Program at the American University of Sharjah,
Do you want to tell us a bit about that story? Because I think it's a very interesting one.
We'll talk about that. I'm very happy that I had a bit of contribution in establishing that program back in the late 1990s. I observed that there were very few professional planners who were trained in the field of urban planning, urban design. And most of people who practiced planning at that time were, coming from architecture, civil engineering, geography, and other fields.
Yeah.
And I thought perhaps with better planning education, we can improve the professional caliber of the planning authorities at that time. So I ran a quick survey across the 8 planning jurisdictions at the 7 cities, 7 emirates plus Al Ain. At that time, Al Ain had its own, and I think it still does, planning authority. So, and then, the results came back from those surveys, and, I analyzed the results. not to my surprise, but just confirmed what I knew already, is that, there are very few. So the percentage of people who are qualified as planners was very small, and among the Emiratis it was even much smaller at that time. So, out of that, I realized that, we should do something about it. And, then started to consider ideas and things, regarding scholarships and other matters. Then I realized that perhaps establishing a program inside the country would help to bridge, reduce that gap. So I went and I scanned the universities in the UAE, and at that time, the American University of Sharjah, struck a spark in my head. I said, they have a school of architecture.
Yeah.
At that time, it was what's called a School of Architecture and Design. And they're a newly founded university, so why not perhaps talk to them and see if they can consider that.
Yeah.
So I wrote a letter, and I went to my boss. At that time, I was working as an urban planner at the Dubai municipality. And I told him, if you don't mind, just read and sign this letter for me. And then I explained to him what's the purpose. He said, okay, fine, I'll sign it for you, but I'm not sure if you get anything out of it. I said, let's try.
Yeah.
So he signed the letter, thankfully. The letter went out, and then, a couple of months later, we received a very positive response from the university. And out of that letter, the two letters, one to them and one back to us, we managed to put together a program that was ultimately endorsed by the Board of Trustees of the university, Science Sheikh Sultan. So, we got the program started in year 2000.
Was it a bachelor's program?
Master of Urban Planning.
Master of Urban Planning. Okay.
Yeah, so February 2002 was the launch, and I had the privilege of teaching, the very first course on that, UPL 501, Fundamentals of Urban Planning.
Oh,
that was the first course that was offered in the program. I never had the intention to teach. I did not have any teaching experience at that time.
Yeah.
I thought I will just help in setting up the program and just walk out.
Yeah.
They, they very graciously, they invited me and they encouraged me to take part in teaching the course. So that's for the program, and it's been thriving, and it's been
of course. And that's why 23 years later, I have the privilege of being in that program.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you, Dr. Ahmed. You bring a lot of value to the program.
Thank you, Dr. Salem, for starting it.
Yeah, so it's and now the burden is on the generation to continue the journey and improve. And and going back to your initial question is that what can we improve? What can we bring into those programs? To make urban planning more responsive and more and better in terms of responding to the needs. I think urban planning programs that are taught in the UAE must also incorporate understanding of the local context, and whether it's natural, environmental, or whether it's cultural or social or economical. We need to, or in a legal framework, we need to make the programs, and as we all know, that urban planning is a field that deals and functions within the confines of all these matters. So we need to make sure that we teach urban planning that is useful for people. Yes, I know that some of our graduates go and practice in Canada, and they practice in other parts of the world, but it's still making the program relevant to the region is very important. I think it's quite important. So students don't feel alienated in terms of relevance.
Yes.
Relevance is very important. They need to see the usefulness of this, and we try to do that in our teaching. We bring in all the local materials, local legacy that we have, the history, the understanding that we have from our professional practice. So that's key, I think, in making the programs more responsive.
Agreed.
And without that, students will always feel that there's a gap. The other parts will be, perhaps bringing a little bit more emphasis on, enhancing the design abilities and, the design skills of students, because, urban planning still has, huge physical emphasis in our part of the world. And, for good reason, that because, we live in a very fast pace, and we want projects and we want delivery, and planners are required to produce physical plans. But also they're required to produce policies, to produce, pieces of urban planning work that can help in getting things implemented in the right way. So I think more emphasis on the design aspects would be very useful. So many of our students come from design background, from architecture, but also we've got people coming from other. Yeah. One of my most brilliant students was a graduate of English literature at some point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was brilliant. She was a lady from Al Ain.
Yeah.
She was brilliant. I mean, she had very sharp mind.
Yeah.
Wow.
I like the way she viewed the city as, as a woman, as a lady.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
The
for
perspectives that we don't see as,
Yeah.
as male planners. So people come from different backgrounds, but I think we need to, elevate their design ability. So I think that's very important.
Yeah.
Now, to do all of that, I think also faculty
Yeah.
members who come to the region also need to be given the room to immerse themselves,
Definitely.
in the planning field. Coming to a suburban campus where you isolate yourself and, you work from your office. Again,
Yeah.
the same thing
Mhm.
that I just said about the planners being
Yeah.
confined to their office. They need to be following with the latest trends, latest,
True.
urban affairs.
Yeah.
Many
Being out in
of them,
the
many of them
field,
don't read
yeah.
local papers now. The RTA recently, parking, introduced variable parking pricing.
Yeah.
And this is a crucial planning tool
Mm-hmm.
for demand management
Right.
and other factors. You'll be surprised that many of the faculty members are not up to date with these things.
And haven't heard of it. Wow.
And they, perhaps they teach everything that they know from back home, from whether it's
Yeah.
the US or from wherever it is. So I think it's important that, that they do immerse themselves, in local planning and,
Definitely.
and bring that dimension. So that's, I think, and the last point I'd like to mention regarding improving the situation, and now I've been teaching off and on since 2002.
Yeah.
One of the challenges that I faced from day one when I came to the university is finding, very solid urban planning literature.
Mm-hmm.
There are no books on
Right.
urban planning, so you look for a general urban planning book to teach let's say your introductory planning course, where students can pick up the book and really read and have relevance and all that. You can't
Yeah.
find it.
Yeah.
It's
True.
not there.
True.
So we end up, picking American books or Canadian books or
Yeah.
British books, and they're useful, but the context is different.
It
The
is.
background's different. All
Yeah.
the legal foundation that they discuss are different. The laws and the acts and all
100%.
that. So we need to make planning more relevant by working on these different
Yeah.
aspects. So I think if we do that, and perhaps I might add another point is had to do with internship.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have not been good
That's
with
so
internship,
important.
so we need to do more internship. We need to
Yeah.
allow students to come into the field and be able to,
Mhm.
to immerse themselves in the field and understand. My advice right now that I give to people who seek advice,
Mhm.
especially graduates of planning programs and all that, I
Yeah.
say go spend 2-3 years in a private office.
Yeah.
A good private
Super
office.
important.
Yeah, go and spend 2-3
Couldn't
years.
agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah, spend 2-3 years, in a competitive and very diverse.
Yes.
But keep your mind open that this context is unique and all that. But
Mhm.
learn
Yes.
Yeah.
the skills, develop the leadership skills, develop your technical and
Mhm.
personal skills, and develop that thick skin. Be tolerant
Right.
to important tasks. And then ultimately, when you come back to the public sector, if you decide to come back,
Yeah.
you don't have to always, but if you decide to come back, at least you bring that. And it's been successful in many other fields that I've also looked at.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Dr. Salem, you spoke about design. I want to go back to the design-led projects because I thought that was very interesting, especially looking at them from the context of the UAE. Do you want to talk about one of the projects that you're working on with your students?
Yeah, every time I've been recently teaching courses like plan making, process and communications, and this semester I'm teaching transportation planning and policy course, and we're doing a project. Group projects. I have 11 students in my class, so we're working within 3 groups working on a transit-oriented development project.
Amazing.
And the students have picked, a station of their choice with some, basic guidelines on what is required from them. They're currently working on devising a transformational plan.
Wow.
From a transit adjacent, from a non fully transit-oriented into fully transit-oriented development, utilizing, of course, all the knowledge that they get from the
Yeah.
course and the literature they read, but also following principles of what makes, a functional and, a workable transit-oriented development. So students are getting,
Yeah.
exposure to the local condition, local settings. They're being given the chance to communicate with the local authorities, to
Wow.
have further understanding. So I think I'm hoping in a month's time we will have some, and I promise them if they do a brilliant job, I'll invite try to bring them to the municipality and RTA.
I was just going to say,
Wow.
I hope this gets presented back to the municipalities
Right.
and
And-
planning authorities.
And that's very much in line also with one of the key objectives of the Dubai 2040 plans to actually have, I think, 55 or 60% of the 2040 population living around
55%.
55% around metro 800
Yeah.
meters of metro stations. So that's really, really great.
That's why I always think the Dubai 2040 plan is totally a transformational
Yeah.
plan that
Yeah.
will help us reverse some of the inheritance that we had from the past 20 years.
Definitely.
That we really bring back the principles of good planning into the city.
Right. And I think also we're in an era where global cities are experimenting a lot with new planning models, whether this is like regenerative urbanism, tactical urbanism, inclusive zoning. If you had to pick, Doctor, one global trend that you find that we should adopt in the UAE, which one of these new ones would you pick?
Well, I think the ones that you mentioned now are
Yeah.
I have a great conviction that they can all be useful. I think tactical urbanism, to my mind, can bring a lot of results.
Right.
Because they're quick and they give
Yes.
you results, and you could demonstrate.
And pilot and test a lot of things quickly.
You could
Right.
easily pilot it at very low cost most often. So you could use such tools. I think anywhere. You could have 2 or 3 of them running at the same time, and then you show results.
True.
So I think we're very thankful that such ideas are there for us to learn from, and we just need to bring in and experiment and hopefully use them as tools.
Absolutely.
And to end our session, I'm going to end the question with, every planner has that one part of the system they'd love to overhaul, whether it's how projects are evaluated, how long approvals take, or how community input is gathered. If you could redesign one aspect of how planning is practiced in the UAE, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a very tough question to end with. I haven't given it any thought, unfortunately, but I think for me as a planner, I think I sincerely hope that all the local planning authorities in the UAE adopt planning laws and make that a common practice.
Yeah.
Because with such a powerful tool, everything else can, you can fix a lot of things.
And everything falls into place much easier
Yeah,
if you
I
have
think
that
so.
strong
And
foundation.
But everything
you
you
can
said-
legally bind as well the developers. I think that's also
And
an
everything you said,
important
Fatma,
aspect.
they're all important.
Yeah.
I'm not undermining everything you said, is so important. But I feel that with the Planning Act or planning law,
Yeah.
which somewhat sets the legal framework for everything else,
Yeah.
I think you can really, planning gains a lot of legitimacy, and the planning
completely
process
agree.
itself and the planning system
Yes.
becomes more solidified, and it gains the respect and the legitimacy it deserves. But also, I would, call on all the planning authorities to modernize and to upgrade their the calibers, to upgrade their job titles, to upgrade their mindset also, because we're embarking on a period of transformation, urban transformation, in a big sense.
Yeah.
When we talk about the 15-minute city, when we talk about TOD, when we talk about all these ideas, world-class ideas, you need to, with that, you need to upgrade, your
Practitioners and people in the
practitioners,
field.
job titles,
Yes.
job descriptions, the
Exactly.
way you pick
Exactly.
expertise and so on, and the way you train your Emirati calibers. All of that must be elevated together, because without such resources, also is not, you won't be able to realize.
Definitely.
Yeah, public sector has a lot of way to go in terms of upgrading and improving their capabilities. They've done a great job in the past, but now with this transformational vision, I think there is so much
We need
needed
to step
do.
up
Yeah.
the game in that sense.
I believe so, yeah, because ultimately decisions are made within the public sector.
True.
Exactly.
Consultants and teams, they provide advice and recommendation, but also projects are managed and steered by the public sector.
Of course.
So without such modernization, it would be difficult to get the best results
Absolutely.
possible. Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
We'll
So,
do the outro.
Dr. Salem, thank you for taking us through such a rich and reflective conversation. Your journey and perspectives are both grounding and visionary, and we've truly enjoyed having you with us. Really, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. This episode reminds us that urban planning isn't just about buildings or master plans. It's about people, purpose, and vision. We hope this dialogue inspires others in the profession to think deeper and aim higher.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you,
Dr.
Dr.
It's been a
Salem.
pleasure. Thank you.
you.
Thank you.